Okay, here we are. We're going to do a short video on Confucianism for Unit 2, Unit 2 being religions of the Far East. And I hesitate to call Confucianism a religion per se. Let me back up. Sorry, skipped a slide there. In your book, the textbook that we're using for this class says as much. It's not exactly a church, but more like a society, a rule, a school of thought, maybe a form of government, a state. The priests aren't seen as liturgical, right? They don't proceed. Sorry, they don't. They're not like in charge of the rituals or some sort of services, some sort of religious services, but they're rather seen as a parent, a teacher, a guide, or a state elder, something like this. This tradition arises, like many of the traditions we're studying in Unit 2, from the region of the world now predominantly known as China. Other regions too, other countries as well. But the most of this is we're talking about China, but also maybe a little bit of South Korea. But this emerges during the Warring States period, just like the other traditions, a lot of the traditions that we've looked at so far, and the Warring States period, 8th to 3rd century CE. Now, this tradition, it draws from the teaching of the scholars, or Jujiao, which is based on the mandate of heaven. We talked about the mandate of heaven, the Qianming in the Taoist video. And there's a veneration of ancestors. But Jiao, of course, did not start with Confucianism, but from this Confucius develops a school of thought that emphasizes the cultivation of virtue and interaction of the rulers on earth with heaven. And it focuses on developing a just and orderly society that reflects the order of the cosmos. So again, it arises during the period of the Warring States. That's the 8th, 3rd century CE, of the Common Era. And during the Qin Dynasty, this is there's a unification and an end of this period of Warring State. It builds most of the Great Wall. The name China comes from the Qin Dynasty, and then after that is followed this is followed by the Han Dynasty, which further unifies and strengthens China. Now, the life of Confucius is roughly the same time as Lao Tzu, who's seen as the person who brings us the Tao Te Ching, the early Taoist sage, the first Taoist sage. So again, Confucius, otherwise known as Kongzi, we'll get a few images of him here in just a moment. Again, lives around the same time as Lao Tzu, same time as the Persian Empire, the Hebrew prophets, the Buddha, the Mahavira, remember from Jainism, and even Athens' Golden Age. And so this is what's led, who's the guy? Is it Buber? Martin Buber, I think, is the man, the philosopher who coined this, the axial age. This time period was the axial age because all of these religious and philosophical figures were propping up all over the world, completely isolated from each other, but they were bringing these axiomatic truths to the world. So this is known as the axial age. But anyway, so he's living during the time of the Zhao dynasty, or the Zhu, I think is, I don't know how to pronounce these, all of these words. So please forgive me if I'm butchering your language if you're a native Mandarin speaker. But I've been told different things by different students who said they spoke Chinese, said they spoke Cantonese or Mandarin, and some of them say Zhao, some of them say Zhou. I don't know. I'm sort of used to saying Zhao, so that's probably how it's going to come out if I refer to it ever again. I don't think we will say much about it, but this is the time period in which we believe Confucius actually lived, and we're pretty certain about this. We're pretty certain this was actually a person. But of course, most of the accounts about his life are based on legend, and he was never widely recognized during his own lifetime. Unlike founders of some other religions, when we get to Islam, we'll see Muhammad, who is actually recognized during his own time period for being a holy man. So his Analects, he wrote a book called the Analects, and that's what he's most famous for. And it has details of his life, but mainly it just is a collection of his famous aphorisms, his sayings, short statements of wisdom. And some think that he was orphaned. He speaks about respect for parents, but he never really mentions his own specifically. According to our textbook, he's born into a family whose ancestors had been prominent in the previous dynasty, and they lost positions through political struggles. So this is another version of the story. His father was a soldier who died when he was 3, and he was determined to become a scholar after this, but his family's financial and political woes forced him to take a sort of more humble work. And he married when he was 19, had children, and then his mother died when he was 23. He mourns for 3 years, and some Confucians say that this is the appropriate mourning period for, at least for your parents. When your parents die, you're supposed to be in mourning for 3 years after that. And so during that period, he lived as an ascetic, and he studied ceremonial rites, or li, right? I've got this vocabulary word here on that previous slide. Li, we've seen this before in Taoism, but it's going to take on a slightly different meaning here. I have the term rites here because that's sort of how it came up in Taoism, but you're going to see that for Confucius, it takes a slightly different spin. We'll get into that in just a moment once we get through this lecture. So he back to the story of Confucius. He sets up a school. Apparently he sets up a school. Oh, I'm skipping a lot. Let me actually back up. He's obviously well educated, and he must have plenty of leisure time because he pursued art, music, and poetry. And he was also a self-taught master of the classic literature. We'll talk about the classics in a few more slides. He gained renown as a teacher of li, of rites, of manners, of ritual. Again, more on that later. And he sets up a school which accepts all walks of life. So some students eventually do gain office, but he allows anybody in, no matter what your status. And apparently, according to historical accounts, many of his students actually did, even though he himself, Confucius, never became a powerful politician or anything. His students did. So his influence, lived on through his students. He wanders and spreads word of his teachings until apparently he's invited back to Lu province. This is where he's from, the Lu province. And this was a period of political chaos, and the stability of the early Zhao dynasty had given way to this chaos. And Confucius comes to believe that when rulers rule badly, this is what causes subjects to rebel. This is what causes disillusion. So the rulers need to be these role models that the people look up to and try to emulate. And also the people have to have a certain respect and reverence for this people. So respect, not equality, is what brings about tranquility in society. That's one of the basic teachings of Confucianism. He felt that a return to classical rites, the li, as he understood them, and standards of virtue was the only way out of the chaos that arises during this period of the warring states. So again, a little bit more about the li. We'll expand on it probably more and more as we get along. But li is is sort of foundational in the Zhao dynasty. It's a worldview of sacrifice as a blessing to the gods. But for Confucius, rituals should be a form of behavior. It's not sacrificing animals. It's not chanting certain mantras or things like this. It was respect for your ancestors. It was behaving correctly, having the proper role between different segments of society, the proper role, social gestures and postures that you were supposed to respect and enact yourself. And the heart of this is respect for ancestors, really. It all boils down to respecting your elders, respecting where you came from. Rulers have to perform classical rites, and music is properly done as well, and they have to remain visible. Unlike the Tao, right? In Taoism, the less you know that you're being ruled, the better. The sort of hands-off approach seems to be what is advocated in Taoism, but a very public persona. The ruler needs to be out there showing the people and presenting high moral characters to inspire the common people to be virtuous. So these basic societal roles, there's these four sort of basic: the ruler to the subject, older to younger, husband to wife, father to son. It gets even more complicated. We could talk about older brother to younger brother, older sister to younger sister, older brother to younger sister. For Confucius, humanity is only able to be perfected through a proper observance of these societal relations. These relations, respect for these relations, and li, right, these social postures, manners, conduct, these are the key to a good society. And in all these relationships, okay, in all of them, the first that's on the list is always superior to the second, the father to the son, the husband to the wife, right? So this is obviously a patriarchal system we're working with here. No surprise there, I guess you should say, in the history of world religions, most of them pretty strongly patriarchal. But the first is superior to the second, but the idea is that there are distinct obligations and responsibility for each. So even though the ruler is superior to the subject, he still has to have respect, and he can't treat his subject just any way he wants. In the ideal world, there's this sort of reciprocal hierarchy in which each knows their place and they respect the one above them and below them. It starts from the family and spreads out to society. So filial piety, respect and love for your elders, this is seen as the foundation for it all. It's a foundational virtue of Confucianism. In fact, I have a long quote here. This is taken from the Book of Rights, and it's in your textbook, but this is sort of a description to give you an idea of what they mean by filial piety. This is a very seems pretty extreme. But heck, I hope maybe someday I have kids like this or something, who knows. It says, on getting to where they are with bated breath and gentle voice, they ask if their clothes are too warm or too cold. So this is how you're supposed to take care. Wow, vroom vroom. I don't know if you can hear the race cars outside, but I live really close to a busy street. So sorry, let's start over. So this is how you're supposed to act towards your parents when you're taking care of them when they get older. So on getting where they are with bated breath and gentle voice, they should ask if their clothes are too warm or too cold, whether they're ill or pained or uncomfortable in any part, and if they be so, they should proceed reverently to stroke and scratch the place. They should in the same way, going before or following after, help and support their parents in quitting or entering the apartment. In bringing in the basin for them to wash, the younger will carry the stand and the elder the water. They will beg to be allowed to pour out the water, and when the washing is concluded, they will hand the towel. They will ask whether they want anything else, and then respectfully bring it. All this they will do with an appearance of pleasure to make their parents feel at ease. So this is a part of what what he's talking about. Li, these social postures. This is how we need to take care of our parents when they get older. This is an example. Another thing I almost skipped. Another important concept for the Confucian is Ren. This is translated in many different ways. Innate love, kindness, benevolence, goodness, compassion, humaneness, human-heartedness, co-humanity. It's literally the Chinese symbol. It's a combination of the symbol for two and person. And so this is sort of, maybe this is what they're talking about at the end, where you're doing with the feeling of pleasure, that it's not just the postures, but it's also what's in you, that you're feeling it, you feel it in your heart. You're not just doing it for some reward, but you actually know that it's proper and it's right and it makes you feel good. And I don't know, your heart is in it, I suppose, is the best way I can put it. In Confucianism, he also does talk about the Tao. So that is something that pops up in some of the Confucian writings. You hear about the Tao. This is the natural course of things, but of course, it's much more communal than in Taoism. It's not some sort of cosmic force necessarily, although that is part of it. The focus in Confucianism is order in society, so it's more of a communal thing than in Taoism. Now, Fuzi, I don't think I have this word written here. Maybe I need to correct that, I feel. Let's see. My apologies here. Let me pause here just a sec. This is some important stuff. We've already talked about the Tao a bunch in previous videos, so I don't feel the necessity to write Tao. But I do. Hunsi is something for some reason I overlooked here in my slideshow. But this is the idea of a perfected or ideal human being. And that would be someone who is absolutely, a scholar, a mensch, as someone might say, if you're speaking sort of Yiddish. And for the Taoist, it'd be like some Taoist sage who's able to be immortal or something. But for the Confucian, it's more just a scholar, someone who's very wise and understands how to interpret the Chinese classics, the Confucian classics, the six classics, as they're sometimes called. Now, these books are comprised of the I Ching. We've talked about the I Ching in previous videos, so I won't go over this too much. It's the Book of Changes. There's also the Book of Poetry, sometimes referred to as the Book of Songs. And I honestly don't know a whole lot about these. I've read excerpts and I've quotes, but I've never sat down and actually read. Besides the I Ching, I've never sat down and read any of these from cover to cover. Some of them are quite long and incomplete in English, at least the English translations. But the Book of Songs apparently focuses on empathy and the importance of empathy, perhaps Ren, that internal care for others, not just the outward ritual. The Book of Histories is focusing, or sometimes the Book of Documents it's referred to. It focuses on the importance of indications, of commemorations, giving people their due. The Book of Rites, or Li, the Book of Rituals. This has to do with the importance of self-cultivation. This is lost. Also, we don't have any of this left. There are quotes from it that we can gather from other books, but it's lost in the annals of history. The Book of Music, as the title suggests, focusing on the importance of music and the arts, it's also lost. And then finally, we have the Spring and Autumn Annals. And this is, again, focusing more on the importance of history, and it chronicles events that took place in the state of Lu. Remember, Lu is the province where Confucius is from. According to tradition, Confucius sat down and edited older documents and put them into the form that's now known as the Confucian Classics. And his teachings were considered relatively insignificant when he was alive. But after he dies in 479, roughly 479 BCE, warfare and chaos continue. But after there's a brutal reunification of China under the Qin and Han dynasties, Confucianism starts to spread. It starts to resurge. And by the 2nd century BC, the Confucian Classics becomes the basis for civil service exams under the new regime. And the gentleman scholar is devoted to proper government. This becomes the highest profession, and this is sort of the ideal. This is what you want to become as a Confucian scholar. That's the highest honor in society besides being the ruler. Now, there were some divergent followers of Confucius. You can talk about people like Mencius and Minci as Confucians, but they really developed some of their own teachings. Mencius is the most popular of these two that I mentioned, and we're actually going to cover them briefly. There's a couple readings by Junsi and some selections from the Book of Mencius, the second sage, as he's often referred to, that we're going to cover in this class. So I'm not going to go into too much detail here in this video, but since I'm posting these on YouTube, for those of you who want to know a little bit about these two sages, the second sage, Mencius, he lives around 390 to 305 BC, and he's born about 100 years after Confucius dies. So they did not live during the same time period. During his life, Chinese society becomes more chaotic. This is almost like a recurring theme in Confucianism. All these teachers come up with their teachings when society is falling apart. His major contribution to the tradition was the belief in the goodness of human nature, that humans are innately good. And he also focuses on yi, or what's known as righteous conduct. So, you can think of, if you're familiar at all with Western philosophy, Zunzi is sort of like the Thomas Hobbes, and Minci is almost like the Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Thomas Hobbes thought that human nature was essentially selfish and grabbing for things that were just self-serving and only could be guided into good behavior with strong government. Really, that was sort of Hobbes. Whereas for Mencius, he thought that people naturally inclined towards good behavior. They just had to be nurtured properly, but they were naturally good by nature. And Mencius here emphasized moral duty to rulers to govern by a principle of humanity and for the good of the people. Nothing really new there, but this is the natural way. He says the people are naturally good. They're not guided by profit motives. They don't have to be forced into good behavior. All they have to do is to see the proper behavior, to be exposed to situations that help them develop empathy and love and rin, for others, and that's all that is necessary. Now, Sun Tzu, on the other hand, thought quite the opposite, that humans were by nature very selfish. He completely disagrees with Mencius. He thinks that we're, again, self-centered. Heaven is impersonal. Heaven doesn't care about you or anything else. And heaven and the universe just operates according to natural laws. It doesn't intervene on the side of good government, doesn't fulfill human wishes. The only way to constrain humanity's bad tendencies for him is to teach and legally enforce the rules of Li, the proper rights, and Yi, the righteous conduct towards others. And so, again, this is the basics, and we'll get more into details. If I'm going to post a discussion that I had with my monthly discussion group over Minci and Zunci, and that's up on our course website for my students. But I wanted to say a few things about these guys before moving on, because I know some people are watching this on YouTube and might be interested, so didn't want to short them that. Now, Confucianism as a state cult, it becomes a bit more religious, and you might actually say, well, Confucianism is a religion if you're just looking at what's known as Neo-Confucianism, and scholars like Zuzi, he lives in the Common Era, 1130 to 1200, and he gives a metaphysical basis for Confucianism. The individual is intimately linked with all the cosmos, quite distinct from Zuzi's claims that the cosmos is impersonal and not concerned with your lives. No, everything is sort of interlocked, and he stressed the importance of meditation and dedication for becoming a noble person. So a much more religious form of Confucianism. The ideal is extreme self-sacrifice, not doing anything for yourself, but only for the state, only for God, or the gods and the spirits. And he increases this emphasis on offerings. That doesn't seem very Confucian to me, but maybe offerings can be construed very broadly, not just sacrifices to gods, but maybe giving things to charity. But he thought that these offerings would preserve a harmony between heaven, earth, and humanity. And so ritual sacrifices are starting to be incorporated as forms of Li. And I've had quite a few students from China who told me that this man is not very well loved in China. He's seen as a really bad person. Yeah, I know Confucianism is starting to get a bit of a resurgence, or maybe I could be mistaken, but I know there's the Confucius Society, which is pretty controversial, actually. There are a lot of people who think that it's trying to brainwash Western students into accepting Chinese values or something like this. And the Chinese government argues that the Confucius Society is just, it's just helping spread teachings of their culture and make people more culturally aware, and it's completely innocuous. And I haven't looked into it, so I really don't have an opinion either way. But certainly it seems like if that's the case, if there is such a thing as the Confucius Society, then the Chinese government isn't quite as shy about its Confucian influences. I know that during the Cultural Revolution, right, under Chairman Mao, Confucianism was seen as one of the four olds. So the Little Red Book, Mao's Little Red Book, replaces the Confucian classics after that, right? During the Cultural Revolution, Confucianism is seen as one of these old ideas, old culture, old customs, old habits, one of the four olds. And we know quite a bit more about the I guess sort of the what's the word I'm looking for? The aftermath, the cultural aftermath of all this stuff. But for a time, it seemed like Confucianism was dead and buried in China. On the flip side of that, it was sort of an unacknowledged influence. Okay, but certainly some things that happened during the Cultural Revolution were very non-Confucian. You had children turning their parents into the Communist Party for not being loyal enough, and that wasn't a very Confucian virtue, I suppose. scholars were sort of objects of derision during this period. They were seen as part of the bourgeoisie, not a part of the working class. But nevertheless, as I say, Confucian morality, I think, has had a lasting influence, even though it may be unacknowledged influence, and maybe more so acknowledged today, now that you have things like the Confucian. I hope I'm getting that right. I don't know if it's the Confucian Society or it's the Confucian Organization. Forget the name of it, but you can probably Google it and find out what I'm talking about. Again, I don't know a whole lot about it, but it seems like the Chinese government is coming to terms with the fact that Confucianism still has a big impact on Chinese culture. It's not all Mao, it's not all communism, um, and it's still not recognized, though, by the government as a religion. And maybe that's because it really isn't. Some might argue it's not a religion, and we shouldn't even be covering it in this class, because this is a class on world religion. But I think part of the reason you take a class in world religion is to learn about other cultures. And I think to understand China, you got to understand Confucianism. But it is interesting that they list Buddhism, Islam, Taoism, Protestantism, Catholicism. These are all permitted religions in China, but Confucianism is not listed legally. Um, Now, there's talk about capitalist Confucianism in your textbook. I won't go into that, but this kind of reminds me of the sort of new interest in Stoicism by these business guru guys. You see videos on YouTube about Stoic philosophy and how it can improve your life, self-help type stuff. This is sort of, when I hear words like capitalist Confucianism, this is what I think about. But Confucianism is not just limited to China. There's strong centers of support in South Korea, in Taiwan. I think there's a bit of Confucian schools or centers, and even in Japan, right? So, and I think that there's a lot of no, I wouldn't say a lot, but there's a little bit of dialogue between Confucians and some Aristotelians, people who study Aristotle as an ethicist, because there's quite a few parallels, political and ethical parallels between the teachings of Confucius and the teachings of Aristotle. But this is a very short video, but it's only half a chapter out of our textbook. They don't really much into it, and I'm even kind of hesitant about covering Confucianism for this course, but I gave you my argument for why I think it's still appropriate. I hope you agree with me, and I hope you enjoyed learning about the little bit we did learn about Confucianism in this video. And if you want to learn more, there's the textbook, and there's lots of good resources there. Plus, also, we've got those 2 readings coming up on Fuzi and Mencius as well. So you can read those. I think they're pretty interesting, a lot more philosophical than what we've been looking at this semester. We've been looking at a lot of history, anthropology, cultural study, and we're kind of forced to get more philosophical when we look at these readings by Fuzi and Mencius. So looking forward to that, and thanks for sticking around till the end of the video. If you liked it, subscribe. I know this is the first time I've ever said that in a video, but it seems like people are starting to watch my videos, and maybe I can make some money off this. Maybe I should start a Patreon or something, and I can retire and focus on my music and making art and stuff like that, and just do lectures for fun. Okay, so next video, we're going to get into the Abrahamic faiths. This is going to be great. We're going to start the last unit, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and there's a lot to cover. Each one of those traditions is probably going to get at least 2 or 3, maybe 4 videos each. So strap in. I'll have those videos posted ASAP. Thanks for sticking around again, and I hope to see you on the other side. Cheers.